Rima, could you start us off with an introduction as we do this?
Sure thing. Thanks, Kirsten. And it's great to be here. I'll be quick. My background, I'm a partner at KDT Ventures. We invest in everything, as we say, where biology and chemistry meet compute. And so how can we use biology and chemistry to solve big problems across industries, therapeutics, chemical manufacturing, agriculture, and anything else. My background, I'm a physician scientist by training. Early part of my biotech career was in company building at a venture creation firm called Fanon Innovation Studio, where I worked on some therapeutics companies and helped spin them out before joining KDT as an investor 3 years ago. It's great to be here.
So glad to have you here, Rima. Rich.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rich Gans. I'm a senior venture partner with Orange Grove Bio. Orange Grove Bio is a biotech development corporation, so we're doing very early therapeutic startups out of academic medical centers. I've been in the life sciences world my whole career and delighted to be able to participate in this panel. So thanks for having me.
We're delighted to have you too. Nancy.
Hi, everybody. Nancy Hong. I'm a managing director with Rivervest Venture Partners. It's a life science venture capital firm focused on both medtech and therapeutics, with a little bit of diagnostics tools thrown in for fun. The firm is headquartered in St. Louis, but I'm based out in San Diego. And we do seed, Series A, Series B, looking to lead and co-lead deals. So great to be here today and so proud of Equalize. It's been a great 3 years.
Yes, and you have been with us since the beginning. So thank you so much for that, Nancy. So our focus of our discussion today is funding in a challenging economic environment. And so let's just start with a discussion then about the current funding environment. What was it like? What is it like now versus, a few years ago? And how much does it depend on the industry area? And Rima, I'd like to start with you.
Sure. So it is funny. I started my venture career right as the pandemic started. So I was a virtual investor, and now I get to be in person a lot more. But the market has certainly shifted since 3 years ago. And so it's been a lot of learning experiences through that time. What I can say just in terms of the funding environment and what that means for startups that are seeking investment today is, I think the biggest shift, if I were to kind of drive home to something very conceptual, is kind of risk aversion. So it went from fully seeing upside potential and assuming that there will be some traction that, a later stage, and I invest very early. I didn't say that before. So we're generally seed stage investors. There's an upside potential, there's a white space, and we believe in the team to capture that white space. This is now across therapeutics, chemical manufacturing, what have you. We believe that they'd be able to build some traction that will continue to build on the story of upward potential that a Series A investor will follow on, right? And the biggest shift is, as later stage investors, driven by public market shifts, became more conservative with how they invested, which is now there were guideposts that they required in terms of revenue, in terms of true commercial traction, what have you. That fed back into earlier stages of investment to say, when we're looking at an investment, it's not just, hey, what could this be if this works? It's what exactly is going to get accomplished in the next 12 months, assuming this company is going to need 6 months to raise that next round of capital. And we've been spending a lot more time than I think when I first joined KDT, thinking about that quarterly plan, that month by month plan. Is the amount of capital we're going to be investing enough to allow for those milestones to build a very tractable business story by the next time the company has to go back out and fundraise. And so there's been a lot more company building, honestly, that has gone on, at least internally, in terms of thinking through every investment, even before we invest, that I think has been really great, right? Again, that's the learning that occurs when you're in kind of down times of the market, to say, how do you really build a company out of a great idea, a great technology in the therapeutic space, in the chemical manufacturing space? I actually don't think it matters a ton what space you're in. The point is, how do you make sure the work you're doing with the first dollar of capital that goes in from a venture investor is working to create a business that's ultimately going to solve a problem in market And that's data you're going to be able to present by the next time you go back out and raise. And I'll leave it at that. But I think it's that risk aversion to say we need to make sure we're underwriting something that is tractable, going to be tractable progress with every dollar invested, as opposed to saying, if this works, there will be someone else to follow on investment later.
Nancy or Rich, anything you want to add about the current environment now versus the a few years ago?
I think
Sure,
Rena,
I'll
got a
jump in.
lot of it. I mean, I think that's why a program like Equalize is so important, because even at these early seed stage companies, it's great to have this plan, a commercial plan, right? And really show that you've understood the market, the competition, even try to anticipate what the competition is going to look like a few years out. And the more you've thought about that, the more you can kind of get investors comfortable that, really we've de-risked a lot of what we can do right now. And then we need your capital to de-risk further, right? So I think it is kind of just this return to basics of, thinking everything through more carefully, being a little bit more capital efficient. And, I think there's still plenty of capital out there, but people are definitely being much more careful before they invest it.
Yeah. And Rich, what do you see as the big changes from a couple of years ago?
I probably had multiple conversations with potential syndicate partners that are excited about what we're thinking about doing, but now realize that they're having to be very careful about how they deploy their available capital. So becoming, as Rima and Nancy just said, much more conservative about the way that they think about new investments. They're having to tend their existing children a lot more aggressively than they probably thought they would. I'd say the other big shift for us, one of our backers is Big Pharma, and we're always thinking about who would be potentially either a syndicate partner or an acquirer. And I would say that the Big Pharma's perception of the market and the overall macro environment has changed a lot in the last 3 years. Although there are glimmers of hope. Some of you may have seen Lilly just did a big deal for a phase 2 asset. I think it was $2.4 billion, something like that. So there's certainly still activity in the market, but I think overall the macro environment is very difficult, and we're just having to work a lot harder to find co-investors and to get the things that we're excited about off to the market. And Big Pharma's, I think, a bit confused right now, particularly in some of the spaces that were really hot. And I'll just point to a couple. So oncology, for instance, 3 years ago was enjoying a pretty fast run. And I would say that the level of interest now for new things in oncology has dimmed quite a bit.
I mean, some of it is just this numbers game where we have been so active the past few years, and so many companies got created, so many teams got established that, the really exciting, good opportunities, it's going to take a while to work through that cycle, replenish the pipeline, and kind of normalize the numbers, right? I mean, no matter how much capital we have to deploy, we have built these bigger portfolios after being active for quite a while. And those are obviously our first priority. So,
right.
Somebody told me there are 90 CAR T companies right now. I don't know if that's a true number, but obviously the pipeline is clearing that out, moving those new exciting technologies into later stage development is going to be really important.
Well, for those that are earlier stage, and as you've noted, capital is harder to come by now. What are things that they can do? What are strategies that they can do in the areas that you each are investing in? Talk about those to de-risk, to make the technology or startup more attractive to investors. And Nancy, I'm going to start with you, and I believe you're going to concentrate on medtech for this question.
Yeah, I mean, one of the key early experiments that we like to see in medtech is, even just the animal model data, right? You will sometimes have companies that need money to fund that, and it's a really hard one nowadays for investors to, underwrite. And there's probably got to be, more academic, collaborations where you can find some funding to do the animal model work. And then, of course, the number of firms that are active in medtech, has been relatively shrinking over the years. I mean, there's a few, bright lights of new funds that have come back to medtech, but early medtech is still a pretty small pool of investors. So, even just getting funding for that first in human can be really quite challenging. I guess I would say, back to kind of the people, that so many good companies have been created. A lot of good people are kind of already ensconced in their positions. But even if you can get some of their, bandwidth as advisors, just as people giving you advice, Equalize is obviously one of the best programs for making those kind of connections. That would be a huge value that, you can tout your advisors to other investors if they're willing to talk to other investors about what they see as the potential. And really just building that roadmap as we talked about, that could be quite helpful to de-risk even without capital. So.
All right, Reba, you wanted to talk about some other spaces, including clean tech?
Sure. Yeah. So it's, again, it goes down to these fundamentals of you're asking an investor to trust you that you're going to take capital and build value in the company that you're pitching, right? And if you just put yourself in the mindset of an investor, it's this idea of what do they measure as success? It is the next round at a higher valuation than the current round, right? And so that is based on measurable contracts that are paying you money as a company. It's done, it's showing proof points in markets that have growing CAGR and a good market potential, as well as a number of companies that are innovative enough to work with startup companies. And so when I think about, let's say, the chemical manufacturing space or this clean tech space, the companies that have been successful in getting funding, they've exhausted all forms of dilutive or non-dilutive capital to do two things. One, make the product that they say they can make that is going to ultimately be a carbon negative process, a material that can replace a petrochemistry based material. They've made it. They've found someone who wants to buy it, even at the scale they're able to make it at today and the price point they're able to make it today. And they've gotten feedback from customers who've used their product and have said, yes, this is a product I could use. It does work in my workflow. And the pitch they're coming out to investors with is, here's a product I know solves a problem. I can make it, I can touch it, I can feel it. So can you. Now, please give me capital to start this time clock of venture to say, with this capital, I will increase my scale of production, be able to saturate this market, hopefully go into this next larger market that demands a lower price point, a higher scale. And it's that plan, as Nancy mentioned, of showing this very strategic perspective on how we build value in this business and what have I proven today that will build your trust that I can do this. That's what you want to aim for when pitching investors. And again, remember that time clock for venture. The second you take your first venture dollar, you have to keep building value. Otherwise, you won't secure that next round of capital. So anything you can do to have a very clear plan of what you'll need to do to continue building value, you should do before you take that first venture dollar. And so you present that plan to your venture investor, you're much more likely to secure that investment and just start on that trajectory of being a venture-backed company with greater success.
Rich, you want to comment on therapeutics about this, about the,
Sure.
early stage, what should they be doing as far as de-risking?
Sure. Similar to medtech, therapeutics are all about having in vivo validation of whatever therapeutic area we're looking at. And I think the frustrating part for a lot of PIs right now is that they find themselves in a bit of a paradoxical moment, right? Everybody can articulate what they would like seen, but it's difficult to find the money to actually get there. And clearly de-risking technology or new therapeutics further than you would have had to a couple of years ago is really important. So being creative about using non-dilutive financing to do that is, I think, one of the things that I think of most investors view as not only important, but it kind of shows the scrappiness and zeal of the new company. So one way to do that is with traditional SBIR funds. And those are, I think, always frustrating because the phase one grants are not very big, $250,000 range. And people get frustrated by those and say, well, it's not enough money to justify the amount of work required to get them. But, one of the companies I'm working on right now, we just got a phase two grant, or we think we have. I guess we haven't gotten the money yet, but pretty sure we're going to get the money. And that's a $2.5 million grant. So, $2.5 million, even in therapeutics, can really help de-risk some of that early stage work. And in therapeutics, it's usually fairly straightforward about what you have to do, right? You've got to go do the work necessary to convince the agency to allow whatever you're working on to be tried in humans. So that's what we spend most of our time thinking about and trying to do in the most efficient way we can, and encourage our PI partners to do exactly the same thing. But it's a challenging time, and I think those that are going to succeed are going to be scrappy and find new sources of capital that might not have been so important a couple of years ago.
Yeah. So what areas, you've been talking a little bit about some areas here and there, but what areas are particularly interesting to investors right now, considering the areas that you each invest in? And Rima, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yes. And we do invest across the board of, as I mentioned, therapeutics, manufacturing, ag. And so I'll talk about manufacturing just because I think that's one of the more unique areas. And that is where we align more with clean tech, right? This idea of how do we mitigate a lot of petrochemistry produced chemicals in use today? Biomanufacturing is capable of making a lot of those materials. And there has been a bit of a shift where we've made a lot of investments in biomanufacturing platforms. What we've realized is we need to figure out ways to make it cheaper and more scalable. And that's where there's been this evolution of cell-free based platforms. So that's an area of the world we get excited about in terms of the platform. But in terms of application now, what we're realizing is it's really tough to displace commodity chemicals at the price they're at today. And petrochemistry isn't going anywhere today. And so where our portfolio has evolved on this space is actually focused on consumer biology, where there are consumers who are willing to pay a price premium for a bioproduced product in a number of contexts. And what ends up happening is for our companies that are relatively early on in the scale at which they're able to produce this biomaterial, they're able to make enough of that product to meet a demand for a consumer, and that consumer is willing to pay a little bit more for that product. And so there's a story that starts to build that actually can allow this company to build a brand around a bioproduced product. And so there we've, companies like CheckerSpot, Solugen early on had a consumer product. Debut is now a company that's biomanufacturing hero ingredients for their own line of cosmetic products. That's an area where we believe it's not necessarily the end game to go after the consumer as a go-to-market, but it is an opportunity to validate a manufacturing platform in the bio-based production space, where there's a customer need, a customer willing to pay money for something. You're able to get it out on market, use the revenue from those sales to continue to scale your business to ultimately get to that point of being able to be at a scale and a price point where you could start to displace petro-based commodity chemicals at the appropriate price point. And we believe the tailwinds are falling into place to allow that to happen. But at this stage, there has been a lot of consumer biology push to enable that future.
Great. Nancy, do you want to go next on that one?
Sure. Yeah. So on the biopharma side of the house, it's still pretty much our, usual sticking to our knitting. We're really trying to underwrite clinical data in patients. And so that kind of tends to push us into the oncology space and the rare disease space where, it's relatively easy to get into those patients early and understand whether your product candidate really is a drug. I think we're trying to be, open about newer areas. We have 3 immunologists, PhDs on board. And so immunology is an area that we've always loved and done some investing in. And I think, there's a good appetite from big pharma to maybe shift a little bit of the attention from IO and oncology over to immunology. On the medtech side, I think it's the same story, traditionally very cardiovascular focused, and that's always going to be an area for us. But starting to look at newer, kind of adjacencies, things like obesity treatments. I have a diabetes, kind of monitoring device that I'm really excited about. So, probably still kind of a metabolic focus, probably for the most part, but, neurostim has been really interesting. We see a lot of interesting companies in that space. So would love to get one of those in the portfolio. But yeah, I think, a lot of it's still kind of our core thesis, and then just trying to push ourselves to make sure we don't miss any exciting stories on the edges.
Rich, how about you? What seems particularly interesting right now?
Yeah, so completely agree with Nancy's sentiments. We too have a pretty big immunology focus. So I think of our associate directors, I think of which there are 8, I think 6 of them are immunology trained. So I'd say autoimmune is our number 1 focus area right now, still looking at oncology and inflammation as well. I'd say cell and gene therapy become really tough, frustrating because I like that space. I think it's certainly going to be a really exciting place to invest over the course of the next 10 years. But right now, I would say big pharma is really nervous about cell and gene therapy. Largely because of time to human testing and expense to build manufacturing capabilities. So I'd say we're still, we've got a cell therapy team still looking at deals, but we haven't deployed any capital against any of those yet. So.
All right. Well, Rich, I'm going to start the next question with you. Guidance and thoughts for first-time founders going out right now, considering how challenging it is to actually fundraise right now. What is your guidance and thoughts for those first-time founders, such as a lot of our equalizers here today?
Yeah, so some of this has already been pointed out, but at the risk of being redundant, I'll say it again. I think people being clever about finding new sources of non-dilutive capital will be really important, and trying to move technologies forward and de-risk those in a way that makes them more investable is really important. So I'd certainly encourage.
I think she muted. It's okay. Keep going.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're okay. It was, sorry, go ahead.
No worries. I looked down and it said I was muted. Anyway, so I think that's really important. I think the second thing, if you're right on the cusp of thinking about a new therapeutics or other company creation idea, you ought to be pretty broad about potential partners that you're talking to. Because I think there are new players in the space that can offer, I think, great partnership and can probably propel those technologies to the clinic faster than if you went it alone. And then I think the exciting thing from my perspective that has kind of a more university relations focus is that more and more academic centers are raising their own funds or deploying their own capital into their startups. And Nicole's certainly doing that at WashU, and others around the country are doing the same thing, which is super important for us. It validates our partnership with the university and gives them some skin in the game, which we're excited about. So I would certainly encourage all of you that are thinking about doing new startups to explore with your tech transfer offices and other people in your institutions about what capital is available. Some of it may not have been available a year ago or 2 or 3 years ago. So that can be, I think, extremely helpful in further de-risking and moving the technology forward and getting closer to the clinic before you actually seek investors to back it.
Yeah, I'm going to just question one thing about what Rich said. I agree with almost all of it, but I would warn first timers that, sometimes it feels like beggars can't be choosers, and right, you're kind of desperate for that first piece of capital. But, with all the proliferation of new funds, do try to get information about kind of their growing track record, right? And this is a great time to do that because, the tide's gone out, right? And you can kind of see how people have been able to take care of their portfolios, what kind of decisions they've been able to make about, supporting companies that maybe, are a little bit behind on their milestones, want to do an internal bridge. You're just learning a lot about who you actually did come to the table with, right? And whether alignments are always kind of in the same direction. So in as much as, you got to kind of have a very broad net, like Rich said, also remember that, all capital is not equal, and that you really want these great partners at the table with you that have the same vision as you for the company and are going to be there to support you, even if there are some hiccups and, speed bumps, because those are inevitable, right? They're always going to happen. It very rarely just proceeds smoothly from A to B. So do as much diligence on your investors, potential investors, as they are doing on you, right? It really is a two-way street. And even though it feels sometimes like you're kind of in the, sell seat, right? And they're kind of in the buy seat. It is a two-way relationship, and, taking bad capital is sometimes worse than, not taking that capital, right? And finding a more creative solution. So.
Anything you want to add on that, Rima?
Yeah, I mean, I think to really both points, it goes back to understanding that finding an investor is a partnership, right? It's I think there's often with early founders, and I think programs like Equalize help mitigate this tremendously, but often I'm faced with a technical founder who believes they have to give me a Shark Tank pitch and convince me why they'll be able to make millions of, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars on something, which is what I call phase 4, take over the world. Yes, that should be part of the story. That's what you want investors to invest in. But what's missing is phase 1. This is how I prove I'm capable of doing that. And fundamentally, that first round of capital, you're asking an investor to trust you that you'll be able to enable phase 1, or actually phase 2, because as Rich has highlighted too, often phase 1, you should be able to find some creative, non-dilutive means of proving out that breadcrumb of validation that your technology could work, right? And then you go to an investor saying, I've shown phase 1, I need your help with phase 2 to reach this market, or to show this benchmarked data in vivo in a mouse model that, a competitor has shown efficacy in, and I believe I'll be able to show better efficacy, and these are the reasons why. Building that story of how you're going to achieve phase 4 in a very stage-gated way, and understanding that you're asking investors today to underwrite a specific set of activities that will enable you to build the structure and scaffolding to hit phase 4 one day. That's the trust that you can build when you engage with, to Nancy's point, the right investors that you want to talk to. And by pitching that story and getting feedback from the wide spectrum of people, as Richard said, like, that's still helpful for you to allow you to narrow down who's going to be the right partner for you. And, you can build trust both ways. And anyways, that's ultimately what you should be looking for when you're seeking that first investment dollar.
Well, speaking about that first investment dollar, how easy is it to get an initial conversation with an investor right now, Rich?
So this will sound a little paradoxical, but I think in some ways it's easier. A lot of firms have decided not to be deploying as much capital, so their capacity to look at new deals has increased. That said, the macro environment being as tough it is, and the level of conservative thinking amongst investors, as we've talked about earlier, has gotten even deeper. So I think weighing those two things, it's I think several people have pointed out that the amount of work and diligence you need to do on the people that are across the table has gone up a lot. But I think if you do that work, you'll be able to find people that are willing to engage and listen to your pitch and listen to your plan for how to conduct that. As Rima said, that kind of phase 1, get it done, get it closer to the clinic type of work.
Yeah, I agree. It's a little paradoxical because, the bar is higher, so people are pickier, but then that hopefully kind of narrows their, and their focus, right? And so it's always a little bit inefficient in our, our investing world to like find the right people you're supposed to be talking to that actually want to invest in what you're doing. But if you can figure that out, maybe the process actually has become a little bit more efficient, right? Because people kind of know what they're looking for and know where they're willing to take a little bit more risk. And that's just crystallized a little bit more for a lot of groups. And so, hopefully you won't be wasting as much time having, conversations with people that, just ultimately wouldn't really invest. I mean, I don't think any conversation's truly a waste because you're usually trying to learn something anyways, right? Even if they don't invest. But still, you can spend a lot of time in a lot of meetings that, might not end up getting you that check that you're looking for. So I think Zoom too has made it a little bit easier because folks, used to be like, oh, you have to set up this meeting, you have to, block out this time in your calendar. Maybe it's a slightly, lower bar with Zoom that it's like, oh yeah, sure, I'll take a Zoom meeting. I guess that makes, the pitch deck all that more important, right? That you want to have a really great pitch deck to entice people to do that first meeting.
Right. And actually that goes to my next question about how should you get that initial conversation with someone, Nancy? And then we do have a question from the audience. I'll get to that one next. So
Okay.
Nancy, I'll ask that question of you first. Then how should you get that initial conversation then?
Yeah, I mean, I love it when investors actually do share kind of what they're looking for, right? Because it is such an inefficient, random, sometimes seeming process, right? So some of that is sort of there in the portfolio, right? And if entrepreneurs and potential startup folks look at the websites and kind of it's a lot of work, right? It's not very efficient to like kind of look through the logos and click on each logo, figure out what the company's doing. Sometimes that portfolio mix can tell you like, hey, these guys are already super active in oncology. That's all they do. That's probably a group that I should talk to, right? Sometimes they can already be overweighted in a sector. And so like, hey, I've already done 2 cell therapies in this fund. I don't really need a 3rd cell therapy investment. We've tried at Rivervest to like put out there a little bit more like, hey, this is our investment strategy. These are the types of things we're looking for, quick, access to patient data. We're not super adventurous on new modalities, would probably take a little bit more risk on, novel targets versus novel technology modalities. So we're trying to like telegraph more what we're looking for. And if, people kind of take the trouble to like actually do research on what's already in our portfolio, they could probably get a sense of like, yeah, I'm probably way too out there for Rivervest. Maybe it'd still be fun to talk to them, but it might not be such high odds for a check. So I think getting that initial conversation, it helps if you've done a little bit of research, right? Like, again, this is kind of a human inefficient process. And if you get like a form letter, right? I've had emails with like the wrong name,
Yeah.
Don't blast people because it's generally not going to work, right? Like do some, invest some time to figure out who you want to talk to. And if you customize, an email to me, I mean, I'll try to answer it, so.
Rima, do you have any thoughts about getting that initial conversation?
Yeah, no problem. So it's try to get a warm intro. It's especially when you're part of a group like Equalize, it shouldn't be hard. I'll be open and honest. A lot of VCs they struggle with time management because our time is split between, among portfolio support. A lot of our companies need us. We're on multiple boards. We have to make time to look at new deals because that's how we build our portfolio for funds to come and returns to come for LPs. We have to do a lot of things that require task switching. And so if there's a name we recognize in our inbox, we're more likely to follow up. Nancy's right. I'm generally always going to allot time every single day to meet new people and talk to new people. That's a given. So if it's a warm intro with a compelling deck, then I will take that first call. I think one of the biggest things on the deck, apart from what Nancy already said around making sure you're addressing the right investor for the technology and the company that you're building, is to be a thorough historian of the company and technology that you're building, so that it's easy for me to see, let's say, we understand the oncology, I'm not going to say we, Richard and Nancy understand the oncology space, right, really well. They're going to know and understand kind of where you sit in the context of other technologies that have been attempted in that field. So that pitch deck should present your technology in a way that shows, A, this is why things have failed and why your technology can succeed. And B, what is your plan in terms of experiments to say head to head, we're going to go against, Merck's the model that a program from Merck recently was approved for, their animal model, we're going to use our experiments to show head to head that we're going to outperform them, right? Like there is a path that you can research and understand in the greater context of, where your technology fits in the market, that you can present without having to, take on more capital. But again, to build that trust that on first look, it seems like they've done their research. They understand where they sit in the market. I agree with them. And it's just going to be a much more productive first conversation, as opposed to saying, we're doing cell therapy, it's CAR T, it's a big market. Yes, we all know that, but there's a lot of competition. Help us understand why you're unique. And that is, I think, what makes a successful pitch deck.
Rich, anything you want to add to on that initial conversation part?
No, thanks.
Okay.
No,
All right. I'm gonna ask. Sorry, go ahead, Rich.
No, I think that sums it up. Thanks.
All right. So a question from the audience. Any thoughts on the macro market reaction to AI investment right now, which is obviously an area of huge interest and concern and all over the place on that. And I know that, obviously the three of you tend to focus more in the healthcare area, but obviously AI is huge in healthcare, as we actually saw, I think, from some of our digital tool and other presenters today. Anyone want to tackle that one first, since we didn't have anyone prescribed for that question?
I can go ahead and give a stab. I mean, you heard me say that RiverVest tends to be a little bit conservative. So we're, very much in the wait and see mode and the show me the data mode, where would love it if AI could solve some of the inefficiencies of our system. Obviously biology is so complex and chemistry is complex, and, feels like computers should be able to solve some of these problems. But until we really see the fruits of that in a FDA approval, we're going to be kind of waiting back to let the field figure out, like, what are the best technologies, where do we want to apply them in the drug discovery and development process, where's really the value add. I'm a little bit just skeptical, just because I view biology as so complicated that I just don't know that there's a formula out there yet, and AI, it would be great if it comes up with it, so I just probably will wait to see it. And, it's exciting, though, that a lot of other people are much more brave than me and are doing the experiment. So I'm watching closely and with high interest.
We've invested in a lot of technologies that use AI. And our ultimate take is the application and the data set that exists that allows you to allow AI to be used to its maximum potential is the moat that we focus on. So, I'll give an example of actually my first investment. It was in a company building autonomous navigation for software for vascular robotic surgery, right? So why is that an AI a particularly good, or why is it a particularly good application? It's because every time a person has a stroke, there is a cerebral angiogram done pre, post, intraoperatively. There's angiogram data from CT, from the entire diagnostic process. The data set in terms of the mapping of how to navigate a catheter from point A to point B exists. So the training data set, if really accrued comprehensively, does exist. And then in terms of navigating a robot, there are fewer degrees of freedom in which a robot can move within within the vasculature, as opposed to kind of a free space like the human abdomen. So thinking about the application and the unique ability for AI to be validated in that application is where we get comfortable with the use of AI. Because from our point of view, there are a lot of constraints around validating its use case in a lot of different aspects that we're still learning. And we're slowly getting more comfortable as we invest in more technologies. And the other piece I'll just mention is, with the advent of generative AI and everything that comes with it, the tools evolve many times a day. And so the ability to see a true technical moat purely on the software AI side of things is impossible. The way we think of the moat is access to a data set no one else would have, and a customer, so line of sight, a product that you can make, and you have captured the customer for that product in a unique way, such that the true moat is having a person on your team who's constantly up to date with all of the tools that are continuously being put out there in an open source manner to make sure they're being integrated into the technology that's being used to build a product that people want, right? So it's still kind of the fundamentals of business and how AI can make that better, as opposed to saying we're just going to invest in a company that uses AI.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I'm going to actually have us wrap up because we are ready to get to our awards, but I have one last question for each of you, and I'm going to start with you, Rich. It's the question that people typically ask at the end, but I always want something that people think afterwards. Okay, these are things I need to be thinking about for the future. So 2 or 3 tips that are takeaways for the audience, particularly those who are seeking funding right now. I know we've talked about this a little bit, but just some things that they could use to take away about what they could be doing to enhance their chances on the funding side. Rich, I'll start with you.
Sure. So a couple of things I've already mentioned, but I'll say again, I think preparation is becoming even more and more important. So do your homework and be ready to think about who's on the other side of the table and put yourself in their shoes. This is a human interaction at the end of the day. And understanding what the motives of the people you're pitching to, I think, is extremely important. As I mentioned earlier, being scrappy about thinking about alternative sources of non-dilutive financing, I think, is really important. Maybe the third is that people say this all the time, but I think it still rings true, and that is that most investors are really concerned about team. They want to see that you have either inside or in collaboration with others, the right people to get the work done. And so making sure, particularly if you're a lone ranger and trying to pitch, that you'll find the appropriate people to do the work, that you've done enough exploration that you can actually point to firm examples of what that looks like and how it's going to get done. So those would be my top 3, I think.
Great. Nancy?
Those were good ones. Well, I guess I would recall what our keynote Sangeeta mentioned is, don't take it personally, right? That you're going to have so many no's. It's so many kissing of frogs. And I think what really helps is to, view it as a process and as an education, right? You've been a domain expert in your technology, and investing is a whole other animal, really. And how are you going to know what the metrics are that we look at, right? It's slightly different, right, than what you're used to thinking about. So, view every conversation, again, with another human as an opportunity to learn, right? Even if it's not going to be a perfect fit, there's still a lot of opportunity to ask questions. I get a lot of pitches that kind of go on this autopilot, right? And, Equalize kind of trains to that, right? That you have this very limited time and you have to cover a certain amount of data. But a real pitch, right, is going to oftentimes be a little bit longer, a little bit more of a fluid conversation. So be open to that and really try to extract value from each, opportunity that you get. Even if it doesn't lead to a check, it could lead to a warm intro, right? I've had that happen with Equalize companies where I wasn't able to invest, but I made a warm intro that led to an investment. So be open to that and don't take no's personally, because it often isn't about you. It often is about these weird, fun constraints that we have that have nothing to do with your particular opportunity. So.
Great. Thanks, Nancy. And Rima.
Yeah, I love that. I was going to say be kind, because that's often hard to find in this space. And it's be kind to that person at the other side of the table, because I promise you, they're not being short, or they're not trying to shoot you down. They're dealing with their own stuff and their own dynamics. And be kind to yourself too, in the same vein that Nancy's describing. And we're all learning how to do this. I mean, physician scientists, like I never learned how to do this, right? It's all on job learning. It's not even on job training, it's learning. The only way to do that is by doing things right and wrong and getting feedback and seeking that feedback. And so it's all a process. And the other piece is somewhat been mentioned, but go in with what's been talked about in venture, which is strong opinions loosely held. You should go into a pitch knowing what you want to do, and yet be open to feedback, right? I've had both where there's a very fixed, this is what I'm going to do, you're wrong for telling me to do something else. And then there's going in with, I think this is right, what do you think? I think this is right, what do you think? You need to find a middle ground to say, this is what I would use your capital for. This is why I'm seeking venture investment. And if there's feedback, I will take it, but this is what I believe is the right path. And so going in with that mindset of strong opinions loosely held, I think is the best way to start.
I love it. I loved all of those pieces of advice. So thank you. Thank you so much, Rima, Rich, and Nancy, for being here today and sharing your insights. We're very grateful that you took the time to be here and to talk about this. I know it is a difficult time. It's difficult as far as all of the companies going out there and seeking funding. It's a difficult time also for the venture investors, figuring out where they're going to put their capital, considering the investments that they already have, as well as the potential deals that could be coming together. So thank you for taking the time today.